What is going on, everyone? Today we're going to be giving you a non-spoiler review for A Quiet Place Day One. So this was one of my most anticipated movies of this year for sure, because I loved the first two A Quiet Place films, did a reaction to the first one on this channel, and then saw the second one right when it came out in theaters. And they are fantastic movies, honestly. Like, they are within my top, I want to say like top 15 horror movies of all time. Some people don't call them horror movies for some reason. I think it's because they're not like hard horror, you know, they're not like gore fests. I believe the first one was even PG-13. I'm not sure if the other ones are too, but they're not that hardcore for horror, obviously. So I can understand why some people don't call it that. I would consider it horror though. They have a lot of horrific sequences, very tense scenes, and yes, there's no, intense gore, but there still is a scare factor there. It's intended to scare you. These monsters are intended to scare you, and the aspect of having to be quiet to avoid them, it is a very horrifying thing. And obviously the first two movies took place way after when this apocalypse started, so a lot of people were wondering, like, well, how interesting would it be to actually get a movie centered around the opening of the apocalypse, which is technically what part two already focused on in that intro sequence, but a full movie of it would be very different. And so when they announced A Quiet Place Day One, I was really looking forward to it. I thought that sounds really cool. Originally, I assumed it was going to be with the same family again. I thought it was going to pick up where that intro sequence in part two left off, and it was just going to focus on the day following that or something. But honestly, completely new characters and a completely new setting, I think, is a lot more interesting and a much better direction to go, because doing a prequel to those characters we've already seen in the prior movies, I don't think would have been nearly as interesting, because obviously we would know what their fates are. We would know they're all going to survive. But having completely new characters that obviously we don't know how far they're going to go into the series, aside from one or two characters, because there actually are some characters that do show up in later movies in this film. That's not a spoiler, it's in the trailer. But the main characters here, they're obviously characters we don't know whether they're going to live or die. So that makes all the scenes a lot more intense. And because we're already starting to get to some positives, let's just jump right into the positives, and then later we'll talk about some of the negatives and give the movie a rating out of 10. So like I was saying, having completely new characters in a completely new setting was definitely the move. And the New York City setting, I think, was the perfect place to go, because there's a lot you can tell here. There's a lot of interesting stories you can tell with this location. And it's obviously a location a lot of movies love to go to later in their franchises. I mean, we just saw it with Scream a couple years ago. They thought, okay, let's go to New York City. The Walking Dead did it with New York City as well. And plenty of other movies. Jason Takes Manhattan. Like, there's all these different movies that love to do that. Although Jason Takes Manhattan, they don't really take place in New York City, if we're being honest, but that's a whole nother conversation. But it's a great setting to go to, because it's a very densely populated area. So a lot of people in a small location, small relatively speaking to the rest of the world, and it's on kind of an island, at least Manhattan is. And because we know how these monsters operate, we know that they don't like water. We learned that in the prior movie. It creates a really interesting scenario where these monsters aren't going to leave Manhattan. They're gonna be there. They're gonna stay there. And because so many of them landed there, anybody who is trapped on that island is kind of just screwed. And you saw this in the trailer, they blew up the bridges. So that's a very common apocalypse thing as well. Whenever a location gets infected with some sort of monster or virus or something, they tend to close off that area and try to quarantine it. That's exactly what happens here. They thought, well, if we blow up the bridges, they won't be able to get out of the island, so at least we can contain them there. And that sucks for the people there, but at least they won't get, out into the world. Obviously, we know that they get out into the world anyways, because they didn't just land in Manhattan, they landed all over the place. But obviously that makes it a lot harder for the people there, because how are they going to get off the island if the bridges are all destroyed? But the interesting thing about this movie is, I'm talking about all this stuff about the monsters and the island. The movie isn't really about any of that. It really is just a very simple story about these characters who are, without spoiling too much about it, they're just trying to kind of relive certain nostalgic memories, possibly for the last time, because a lot of them aren't expecting to survive this situation. And to me, that's actually a much more interesting story than just focusing on characters trying to survive for 2 hours. And I actually appreciate that they took a different route. Because yeah, they could have had it just be this pure survival movie for 2 hours. Just let's see these characters try their best to survive. And obviously that's part of it. But there's more than just survival on the line here, which I think adds a lot to the stakes, because we know how this apocalypse works. We know from the other movies that they're not just going to solve everything. Most people are probably going to die anyways. So focusing on them trying to survive just for the apocalypse to continue on for years and years and years, chances are it wouldn't have the same impact as what this movie actually is, where it does tell a very personal story. The movie is shot beautifully too. Like, it looked stunning. I didn't get to see it in IMAX, unfortunately. I was planning to, but things didn't go as planned. and I still saw it just in regular theater. It was still shot beautifully though. It looked amazing. And it's one of these things where a lot of movies set in New York, I feel like don't actually feel like they take place in New York. You can feel it like, okay, this feels like it was shot at some sort of a soundstage in Los Angeles or something. This doesn't feel like that at all. I don't know where they actually filmed it. I have no idea, but it feels purely filmed in New York City all the way through. Like every second of it feels like it's in New York City, which is impressive because, like I said, a lot of movies don't pull that off. The two main characters here, of course, we have Joseph Quinn as Eric and we have Lupita Nyong'o as Samira. I haven't seen both of them in that many different projects. I mean, obviously Joseph Quinn, he's very well known from Stranger Things recently. He's going to be playing Johnny Storm in the new Fantastic Four. Lupita Nyong'o I've seen in a couple things, but they're fantastic. But in this, honestly, probably for me, based on what I've seen them in, probably my favorite performances from the two of them, which is crazy because I mean, you wouldn't expect such a simple movie like this to bring out so much emotion in two people, but it really does. Like there's a lot of great scenes that do that. One scene in particular that involves a lot of screaming. I'm not gonna spoil it, but if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. I think it was definitely one of the best scenes between them. There's just a lot of very passionate, peaceful scenes with them. I don't know, you could just feel it. You can feel how much emotion comes out of these two characters, and I think you really needed that here because that is what the movie is. It's just these two characters. It is completely centered around their connection, and they are strangers. They didn't know each other before. They just met each other during these, this outbreak, and the whole movie is centered around that. So you really need them to have chemistry, and they do. They work perfectly here, and I thought it was really, there's a lot of touching scenes here. And as for the horror itself, was there actually like good, terrifying sequences? Yes, there were quite a few. It is something that you think would get old over time. It's the same thing, whereas you're trying to be as quiet as possible and just kind of quietly moving around while this monster is just kind of creepily standing there. But they somehow find a lot of unique ways to make a scene like that horrifying. They utilize water a lot here, and there's one scene involving a revolving door, which I thought was brilliant. And there's definitely a lot more of the monsters in this one because, I don't know, I guess maybe I'm assuming the monsters, they just like attracted to more populated areas because, I mean, these are so many dropped in Manhattan. Like it was an insane amount. You saw in the trailer, you see like a bunch of these things dropping down. Yeah, there's a lot. And it makes sense, but in the context of the film, it does make things a lot harder for these characters because, I mean, in like the first movie, you maybe have one or two in the area. I mean, they're definitely very scary, so it's hard to deal with even just one or two, but you literally have like hundreds of them just running down the street. So like it's definitely way different. But then again, you're also in New York City. There's a lot more places to hide, which I think is what makes it very different because you're in a large field, you really have nowhere to hide. That monster is going to come get you. But in this, there's a lot of places, a lot of corridors you can move in, and some of those rooms can be quieter just based on the nature of being behind a bunch of walls. If you're in a field, there's complete silence, you know what I mean? But New York, there's pretty much a lot of just noises that happen regardless of there being people there or not. And a lot more things just covering noise in general. But now let's get into the negatives because I do have one or two things I want to talk about here. So first of all, which this isn't like a huge negative because honestly, I didn't think the movie had to do this, but I did kind of want it. It doesn't really give much more information about these monsters. You pretty much learn next to nothing about them aside from what you've already known about them in the prior movies. And I don't know if that was on purpose or not. Maybe they just didn't really want to add any more information, but I feel like if you're going to do a prequel type movie where it's telling a story of how an apocalypse started, you kind of want to learn more about it. Like you kind of want to know, okay, so how does it happen exactly? Like where are these monsters coming from? Maybe even just learning more about how they operate, how they work. I don't know. There could be something else there. They don't touch on any of that. There might be something hidden there. There's maybe like one or two moments where there's something new you see, but it's not like told what it is really, so you're kind of just speculating. But I don't know if they have more plans with this universe in the future. I know they're probably gonna do a part 3 with the other characters again, but I feel like they could have just told us at least one or two things, and I think I would have been satisfied there. Because to be honest, I mean, most prequel movies like this where they go back to the first day of an apocalypse, usually they tell you something about it. You know, I'm thinking of like Fear the Walking Dead, for example, which was a prequel, kind of a prequel type thing, similar to this for The Walking Dead, where they focus on the outbreak, but in a different location. And you do learn a lot, but you really don't in this, though. I feel like I didn't really learn anything new. Anything we did see here, again, we probably already knew based on A Quiet Place Part 2's intro sequence, like the fact that they dropped out of the sky. We kind of already saw that in A Quiet Place Part 2, so I wasn't like, shocked by that or anything. It was crazy to see that many of them fall down, But like I said, did we really learn anything? Not really. But I don't use that as a big negative though, because at the end of the day, it didn't really matter. This was just a very simple story about these characters, and did it work well? Yes. Did I need a bunch of more information? Not really. So I'm not going to hold it against the movie too much, but it is something that while watching it, I did kind of feel a little disappointed by. But again, I don't think it really affects the movie that much. And the last negative I have is there are a couple moments here where you do kind of have to suspend your disbelief just a little bit, which I'm okay with doing every now and then. But sometimes it's like, all right, come on, like that probably wouldn't happen in that way. And it's just a little bit too convenient for the main characters. And, you know, it happens. Sometimes people get lucky, but sometimes it's like way too much of suspension of disbelief that I'm like, okay, I just don't believe that. A lot of that revolves around the cat in this movie, to be honest. Like, yeah, there's definitely cats out there that are really quiet, but this cat, man, oh my god, it was the nicest cat in the world. It would not make a single noise. It would never do anything that would ever attract the monsters. There was like one moment where it did, but it wasn't like that big of a deal because it was very minor things. But I feel like realistically, there would be more problems with this cat, but the cat was still a cute part of the movie. So I mean, I don't really care at the end of the day. I feel like realistically, it just probably wouldn't have worked out this way. Overall, I'm gonna give this movie an 8.4 out of 10. This is a solid entry in the A Quiet Place franchise, which I do think this is my least favorite of the three so far, but that's not really saying much because I think they're all fantastic. It's definitely one of my favorite horror franchises of all time for sure. I just think the universe itself is just really interesting. I like these monsters. I like how they operate. I think it's one of the coolest monster designs as well. I love how they look. I love how they act. It's just really interesting to me. And I feel like there's a lot you can tell with this universe, a lot of stories you can tell. I mean, yeah, it's a very simple universe, so you might think, okay, well, what more could they really do with these monsters? But that's not really what I feel like these movies have to focus on. Like I talked about before, they don't have to go in depth with all this stuff. If they just want to tell new stories with different characters around different parts of the world, you can do that. It's like The Walking Dead. Like you could just keep telling stories. Doesn't matter that the zombies don't really change. They're kind of the same. Who cares? Just tell a bunch of interesting stories, interesting nail-biting sequences with these things, and I think you can make a lot of movies out of this. And as long as they're good, I mean, I'll be down for it. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I will see you guys all in my next one. Peace out.